Oh, hi there, guys. So there was a really interesting article in The Guardian today which looks at the changing consumption habits of particularly young people and the impact of that on some well-known retailers in the UK like ASOS and Boohoo. So I've picked out a couple of key bits from the article, so let's have a look at those now. So it says, once the feared enemy of the high street and worth more than £5 billion, the online fashion retailer ASOS has seen its value slump as it faces difficulties that could herald the demise of fast fashion. The London-based seller dropped out of the FTSE 250 with a whimper this week, valued at only around 320 million. It says 4 years ago, ASOS and its fellow online fast fashion outlet Boohoo were booming as the high street suffered from COVID lockdowns and largely housebound shoppers going on. It says ASOS and Boohoo face much sharper competition, whether that's from Zara's edgy and rapid fashion shoots, Shein's cheap prices and mastery of social media, or the second-hand specialist vintage one-off bargains, or Next mix of broad choice and delivery options. And then it goes on, the market is also tough. Online fashion sales bounced back to outstrip the high street last year, with sales up 3% to 34 billion according to Mintel. But in general, people are more cautious about shopping. It says prices become more important as shoppers have less to spend, and fashion is competing with plenty of other options, from holidays and music festivals to phone bills and streaming services. It goes on, ASOS primarily caters to young consumers who have lower discretionary incomes and are therefore seeing greater strain on their wallets, causing them to prioritise value for money by either switching to even cheaper competitors or trading up to more premium brands that offer superior quality. And in that environment, the China-founded marketplace Shein has undercut the likes of Boohoo and ASOS on price and proven more nimble on marketing and fashion, and it now accounts for around £2 billion of UK sales. It says today a third of women aged 16 to 24 buy their clothing from Shein, according to Mintel, which is a big bite out of ASOS's 20-something heartland. And then it says finally, in terms of Shein, it says price is not its only weapon. They have invested heavily in technology and supply chain systems, which enables it to spot and react to trends extremely rapidly. And then it's also very tuned into the way young people use their phones, social media, search and video marketing to put products at the forefront of shoppers' minds. So then it says, with profits under pressure from falling sales, inflation on wages and their new regulatory demands, more established retailers are struggling to invest sufficiently to keep up with Shein's innovation. And then it goes on, with AI, you have really got to keep up, and shoppers are almost ahead of retailers with how they are using technology such as ChatGPT to search. Some of the bigger retailers are not as flexible in keeping up. And then it goes on to talk a little bit about Vinted as well, and the second-hand marketplace also taking a bite out of ASOS and Boohoo's bottom line. So I think this is a really interesting story because it wasn't that long ago that chains like ASOS and Boohoo were devastating the British high street and, sending retailers who hadn't been able to keep up with the times into administration. So if you think of the impact of fast fashion and online shopping on places like Debenhams, M&S to some extent, BHS, and then even more recently places like Claire's Accessories. And these stories are interesting because if you scratch under the surface, they really tell us a lot about how we live as a society and the direction of travel for us as consumers and just as people who live in this country. I think the first thing that stands out to me about this story is one that I return to all of the time on this channel, which is that nobody in this country has got any disposable income. Our incomes, and therefore our capacity to spend, whether that's on the high street or online, has been destroyed by the cost of living crisis. Clearly that's accelerated massively since COVID, but it's actually been going on for decades now. Initially, places like ASOS, they were able to exploit that for their own benefit. But of course, as the cost of living crisis has become more acute, even those brands like ASOS and Boohoo, they've fallen foul of people's lack of disposable income. I think it's slightly worrying for us as an economy though, because whilst most of the companies that I've mentioned, ASOS and Boohoo, they might be based in the UK and therefore they're, paying into the system via tax. As we offshore our consumption to Shein and places like Temu and Alibaba, those companies get specific tax breaks, which means that a greater slice of our retail spending, it will be going straight into the East Asian economy. I made a tongue-in-cheek video earlier this week about how we were outsourcing the production of our union flags to East Asia. But there's a fundamental truth to that, isn't there? And I think it's a worrying trend. And then the other thing that's really interesting about this story is just how quickly capitalism is sort of changing and evolving. So the article referenced there the use by those companies of AI, social media, and supply chain systems. And, whereas when I was a teenager, which was less than 30 years ago, a job in retail was almost a sort of rite of passage for young people as they start their career or, perhaps as they need a bit of income whilst they're in education. But it's quite clear that that's ending, or more likely that it already has ended, because we've now got a system where most of the work is being done by robots or by people in poverty in massive warehouses in China or Vietnam. So it all feels a bit like, that film Blade Runner or the new TV show Alien Earth, where you've essentially got absolutely huge corporations, using the latest technology allied to huge social media companies. And anyone who doesn't have access to the technology or to economies of scale just gets shut out. Obviously, I'm really sad if people at ASOS, lose their jobs or if they go into administration. But it's quite hard to have sympathy for the companies themselves because they certainly weren't bothered about stuff like that on the way up. And now they've been eaten by the very processes that they put in place. So we live in really interesting times, definitely not good times, but very interesting nonetheless. But thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot, guys.